Detected.
Hey, I'm Retro Rob, and welcome to Coin Detected, where we dive into the history and legacy of 80s video arcade games and the people who built them. Visit coindetected.com to listen to the latest episode. The year is 1980, and today's game is Battlezone. Battlezone was created at Atari's coin-op division in Sunnyvale, California in 1980. The project was championed by Morgan Hoff, who served as project leader, and the principal programmer was Ed Rotberg. In fact, during development, Battlezone went by the working title Future Tank, hinting at its ambitious aim of a futuristic tank simulator. The idea was to put players inside a tank in a first-person perspective, something unheard of in arcades before. Hoff and Rotberg's team set out to push the limits of Atari's new vector graphics technology to create a convincing 3D battlefield. As Ed Rotberg later explained, Morgan Hoff more or less championed it and decided to put together a team to implement the game. Given the technology that we had, the real challenge was how to make the game appear as if we had more technology than we did. Meeting those needs was where the artistry was involved in designing a game in those days. This creative philosophy guided the development of Battlezone's groundbreaking visuals and gameplay. From the outset, the team faced intense technical challenges. The game would feature a three-dimensional wireframe world with free movement at a time when most games were flat 2D or simple sprites. To achieve this, Atari built Battlezone on a powerful for the time hardware platform, a MOS 6502 microprocessor as the main CPU, aided by a custom vector display generator and a separate math coprocessor known as the math box. This math box was built from high-speed bit-slice processors, AMD 291 chips, dedicated to crunching 3D math. In total, Battlezone actually used three processors working in tandem, one to run the game logic, one to draw the vector graphics, and the math box to handle the heavy matrix calculations for 3D perspective. It was pretty fast, Rotberg said of the system. The math box was so efficient that often the main game code would simply wait for it to finish its calculations rather than try to multitask. This was cutting-edge stuff in 1980. It was now possible to maneuver at will through an imaginary 3D landscape in real time, a first for arcade players. Despite the advanced hardware, memory was extremely limited. The entire game program, including graphics data, fit in about 16 kilobytes of ROM, 12 kilobytes for game code, plus 4 for the vector generator, and the machine had only 1 kilobyte of working RAM for runtime data. Fitting a whole tank simulation into that space required clever optimizations. The developers wrote the game in hand-tuned 6502 assembly language, squeezing every byte. They also employed ingenious tricks to make the visuals pop. For example, Battlezone's monitor was actually monochrome, drawing white or greenish lines, but Atari added a low-tech hack: strips of colored cellophane, gels, on the monitor to create color overlays. A band of red film at the top tinted the radar and on-screen alerts red, while a green film across the lower portion made the ground and tank graphics appear green. This simple overlay gave the impression of a two-color display, even though the vector monitor itself drew only one color. The result was a distinctive look: neon green wireframe mountains and tanks under a red-tinged sky with a glowing red radar scope, Battlezone's signature appearance. Achieving smooth 3D rendering on a 1.5 MHz processor also forced some compromises. The game's world is constrained to a flat plane. Your tank and enemies roam a level battlefield with no hills or flying movement. By restricting movement to a horizontal plane, the math was simplified. The complex 4x4 matrix for full 3D could be reduced to a 2x2 matrix. The math box crunched the perspective transformations for each frame, but there were still limits on how much it could draw. To avoid overloading the vector generator, Rotberg and his team carefully controlled the number of objects on screen. He even went to Roger Hector, the game's graphic designer, who modeled the tanks and obstacles, and asked him to reduce the detail. "Could you do the same thing in less lines, less vertices?" Rotberg recalled. Every line drawn was precious. They also implemented a clever clipping trick. The hardware would draw objects even slightly off screen, but if an object's center moved outside the view, the game would instantly stop drawing it to save resources. This sometimes caused a quirky glitch. If an enemy tank got too close to the player's viewpoint, it might suddenly vanish because its center point left the field of view, even if parts of it should still be visible. Rotberg joked that if they hadn't done it that way, the vector generator would try to draw lines off into the ozone beyond its limits. These kinds of inventive workarounds were necessary to make a 3D game possible on early 80s hardware. Meanwhile, Atari's industrial design team gave Battlezone an equally innovative cabinet. The upright cabinet was fitted with a molded periscope-like viewer that players looked through to see the screen. This periscope had mirrors that reflected the monitor's image, and its enclosure blocked external light, intensifying the feeling of piloting a tank in a lonely battlefield. It was like stepping into another world. Some call Battlezone the first true virtual reality arcade game because of this immersive scope. The downside was that by enclosing the screen, the periscope prevented others from watching the gameplay easily, and younger players sometimes couldn't reach the viewer comfortably. Late in the production run, Atari quietly introduced a full-face or open-front version of the cabinet without the periscope. In these, the monitor was moved to face the player directly, and the mirror and periscope were removed. This not only saved on manufacturing costs, those periscope molds were expensive, but also let nearby spectators peek at the screen and made the game accessible to everyone. The vast majority of the 13,000 Battlezone machines produced were the original periscope design, but a small portion came as factory open-face units or kits to convert existing games. Today, collectors consider the periscope cabinets iconic, while the open-face versions are a bit rarer to find. Battlezone's realistic tank simulation was so impressive in 1980 that it attracted some unexpected attention. After the game debuted to test audiences, Atari engineers noticed they had a hit on their hands. Fellow employees kept sneaking into the lab to play it compulsively. One of the earliest players to master it was reportedly a 7-year-old kid who stood on a chair to reach the controls, astonishing the development team with his skill. The buzz around Battlezone was strong even before release. It officially hit arcades in November 1980 and quickly created such a sensation that, believe it or not, the United States Army came knocking. Atari was approached by a military contractor working for the Army who saw the Battlezone cabinet and immediately thought it could be repurposed as a training device. The Army proposed a special version of the game to train gunners on the Bradley fighting vehicle, essentially a modified Battlezone with more realistic graphics and controls, often referred to as the Bradley Trainer or Army Battlezone. This was a unique moment in gaming history, a popular arcade game being adapted for military training, but it was not without controversy internally. Ed Rotberg was vehemently opposed to turning his game into a military simulator. "I said I didn't want anything to do with the project. I was vehemently against it," Rotberg recounted. He felt that many Atari engineers chose the video game industry to avoid doing military work, and he also worried that having Atari make war training tools would be bad press in light of concerns about video game violence. Rotberg even got into a heated shouting match with Atari's president over being assigned to the Army project. In the end, Atari agreed to do the military version under a very tight deadline, just a few months, and Rotberg was essentially pressed into service because no one else knew the code well enough to meet the Army's specs in time. "I ended up losing 3 months of my life, spending every waking minute at Atari, coming home at 1 a.m., going in at 6 a.m. The game got done," he said of the Crash project. The result, nicknamed the Army Battlezone, featured a different landscape and enemy models, United States versus Soviet tanks, and a yoke-style controller instead of joysticks. Only a couple of these military machines were ever made. It was a secret project and never released to the public. The Army ultimately didn't follow up with large-scale use of the trainer, but the incident became legendary. It was arguably the first time a video game was directly adapted for military use, foreshadowing the future intersections of gaming and military simulation. For Ed Rotberg, it was a bitter pill. He left Atari not long afterward, partly due to the rift this project caused. Nonetheless, the original Battlezone arcade game went on to thrive with players, while the Army Battlezone remains a rare historical footnote and a collector's holy grail if you could ever find one. So what was Battlezone like to play? In 1980, this game was nothing short of mind-blowing. You step up onto a small platform at the base of the cabinet, grab the dual joystick controls, press your face against the rubber-edged periscope viewer, and suddenly you're inside a tank on an alien-looking battlefield. The screen presents a first-person view of a vast plain with wireframe mountains on the horizon and geometric solids, pyramids, and cubes scattered as indestructible obstacles. There's a circular radar scope at the top of the display, drawn in red thanks to the overlay, that gives a 360-degree view of enemy positions around you. Through your armored window, rendered in glowing green vector lines, you see enemy tanks roll into view, search sights on them, and fire away. The controls are part of what makes Battlezone unique. It uses two joysticks side by side. These represent the left and right tank treads. Each joystick only moves forward and back. They're basically vertical levers, and there's a red trigger button on the top of the right stick for firing. To drive forward, you push both joysticks forward. To reverse, pull both back. To turn, you push one stick and pull the other, mimicking differential steering of a real tank. This control scheme had been used in earlier top-down tank games, Atari's own tank from the 1970s, but Battlezone brought it into the first-person realm. It feels intuitive and suitably mechanical. You really feel like you're driving heavy treads. Moving the sticks also has an audio effect. The game features a rumbling engine sound generated by an Atari Pokey chip, which revs up when you push the throttle and idles when you stop. The sound and the resistance of the controls contribute to the immersive experience. When you hit the trigger, your tank fires a shell with a loud boom. In the vector graphics, this appears as a bright line streaking into the distance. Accuracy is vital. You can only have one shot in the air at any given moment. That means you can't just spam bullets. You must make each shot count, or you'll be stuck reloading while the enemy draws a bead on you. If your shot misses and goes off into the distance, you have to wait for it to either hit something or reach its maximum range and fizzle out before you can fire again. This one-shot-at-a-time mechanic ramps up the tension and rewards careful aiming. As you traverse the battlefield, different enemies come at you one after another. The standard foes are enemy tanks, which come in two flavors, ordinary slow-moving tanks and faster, more aggressive super tanks. Both can shoot back, and one hit from an enemy shell will destroy your tank, costing you a life. There is never an overwhelming horde of enemies. Typically, the game will throw one enemy at a time at you in a kind of serial engagement. Occasionally, a second threat like a missile can appear, but you won't face two tanks simultaneously. This gives Battlezone a deliberate, tactical pace. It's almost like a series of quick-draw duels on the frontier, rather than a chaotic free-for-all. You'll scan the horizon and the radar for the next bogey, orient your tank, and try to get the drop on it before it shoots you. Enemy tanks will try to maneuver around the obstacles and line up a shot. Often, a good strategy is to use the indestructible pyramids and cubes as cover, peeking out to snipe at a tank and then ducking back so its return fire hits the obstacle. Periodically, the game mixes things up by launching a homing missile, nicknamed the Buzz Bomb, at you. These missiles don't appear on the radar, since they come in fast from above, and they will streak toward your tank in a menacing howl. They can't be ignored because they'll chase you down. The only way to survive a missile attack is to quickly swivel and shoot it out of the sky, or lure it into crashing into an obstacle. A common tactic is to drive in reverse while facing the missile head-on. This gives you more time to line up a shot as the missile comes straight toward you. When it's close in your sights, boom, shoot, and it explodes. Destroying a guided missile is satisfying and worth bonus points, but the timing is tricky. If you miss, the missile will plow right into you. Many a Battlezone run has ended with a sudden missile strike the player never saw coming. There's also a whimsical target that shows up occasionally, a flying saucer, UFO. The saucer isn't actually part of the war. It doesn't attack and poses no threat. It's basically a bonus point opportunity that zips across the sky now and then. You can ignore it and continue fighting tanks, or take a crack at shooting it down for extra points. It's small and fast, worth a hefty reward if you nail it. It's a fun little touch. You're in the middle of this tank battle and suddenly a UFO. Why not? Shoot it for points. Every enemy kill in Battlezone earns points, of course, contributing to your score. The scoring system reflects the risk of each target. A standard enemy tank is worth 1,000 points, a super tank 3,000 points, and the elusive flying saucer scores 5,000 points. Missiles are worth 2,000 points when blasted out of the air. As in most arcade games, accumulating points eventually yields extra lives on the default settings. You're awarded an extra tank at 15,000 points and another bonus tank at 100,000 points if you can get that far. After that, there are no further free lives, so 100K is a critical threshold for marathon players. These benchmarks encourage you to play aggressively, but also survive long enough to reap the reward. One charming audiovisual treat. If you manage to beat the high score, which starts at a modest 5,000 on factory settings, the game celebrates by playing a triumphant few bars of Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture. Yes, classical music in a tank game. Players who set a new high score are greeted with a stirring da-da-dum boom-boom fanfare from the 1812 Overture, a well-earned victor's salute as your initials go up on the leaderboard. It's a detail that players remember fondly. In fact, hitting certain score milestones triggers a snippet of the overture. For example, at 100,000 points, you'll hear it again. This flourish adds to the feeling of Battlezone as an epic contest. If you ever encounter a classic Battlezone machine, perhaps at a retro arcade or barcade, and want to impress, let's talk strategy. Survival is the name of the game, as the slogan on the arcade flyer put it. It's a battle of skill and survival. The enemy tanks start out manageable, but get more deadly accurate as your score increases, so you need to use every advantage. Here are a few battle-tested tips straight from veteran players and champions. 1. Keep moving, usually in reverse. A counterintuitive but effective tactic is to drive your tank in reverse continually. Why reverse? Because it ensures that any new enemy tanks will spawn in front of you, within your field of view, rather than sneaking up from behind. By backing up constantly, you control the battleground and can often see the enemy as soon as it appears. Also, moving makes you a harder target. Just be careful not to back yourself into a corner. The game world wraps around in a sense. It's not infinite, but you could end up near a cluster of obstacles with little room to dodge if you're not aware of your surroundings. 2. Use cover wisely. Those indestructible geometric solids, the green wireframe boxes and pyramids, are lifesavers. After an enemy spawns, if it's far away or at an awkward angle, consider repositioning near a pyramid so that it's between you and the enemy. You can pivot out, fire off a shot, and duck back. Enemy shells and missiles will harmlessly hit the obstacle instead of you. Just watch out. Don't crash into the shapes, as they'll stop your movement, and you could become a sitting duck if you get stuck against one at the wrong moment. 3. Center your shots. Since you can fire only one shot at a time, make it count. Lead your targets slightly. Tanks moving lateral to you need a bit of aim ahead of them. A common technique is to wait until an enemy tank stops to line up a shot that's your window to nail it. For the fast saucer, you might need to lead significantly, or just take the shot when it's moving toward or away from you, not across your view. And for missiles, as mentioned, line up head-on and shoot at the last second when it's in your sights. If a missile is coming, try to face it directly while backing up so it flies straight down your aiming reticle. 4. Manage the radar. Keep one eye on that radar dish at the top of your view. It's your early warning system. A blip on the radar means an enemy tank, or super tank, is somewhere in that direction, beyond your immediate view. If you see a tank blip behind you on the radar and you're not ready to engage it, one trick is to outrun it. Drive forward or reverse away at full speed until that blip disappears off the radar. If you go far enough, the game will actually despawn the distant enemy and respawn a new one closer to you, often in front of you, as per the reverse strategy. It's a way to avoid being flanked. However, Be cautious. Doing this too much might speed up how soon a more difficult super tank appears, since you're essentially skipping easier enemies. Use it in a pinch. 5. Prioritize threats. Not all enemies are equal. The super tanks have faster projectiles and better aim, so treat them with respect. Take them out as soon as possible, even if it means letting a saucer go by. If a super tank spawns while a regular tank is still wandering, focus on the super tank first, though usually only one tank is active at once. The guided missiles are an even higher priority. Drop whatever you're doing and shoot the missile the moment you hear it approaching or see it, because you can't ignore a homing missile. The saucer, on the other hand, is purely optional. Shoot it if you have a clean shot and no immediate threats, but never put yourself in danger just to bag the UFO. It's a bonus, not a requirement for survival. 6. Stay calm and get in the zone. Battlezone, like many classic arcade games, has a sort of flow state. Advanced players often describe getting into a trance where their reflexes and awareness synchronize with the game. There's a certain class of games where you just get into a trance when you're playing them, as one Atari engineer put it. In Battlezone, panic is your enemy. Sudden jerky moves or wild shots will get you killed. The best players stay cool, making deliberate movements, and almost zen-like, they anticipate the next enemy. This comes with practice. As your skills improve, you'll start to feel that rhythm. Spawn, hunt, destroy, repeat, gradually upping the pace. It's incredibly satisfying. By following these strategies, skilled tank commanders can extend their play sessions dramatically. The game does ramp up in difficulty, with enemy AI improving and firing faster as your score climbs. Most casual players in 1980 struggled to break 50,000 points, but experts found that with enough practice, they could play indefinitely, or at least until physical exhaustion set in. In fact, Battlezone became one of those games that invited marathon sessions by hardcore players. Upon release, Battlezone was a commercial hit for Atari. It was sold to arcade operators at a list price of $2,095, a significant investment at the time, yet arcades eagerly bought it, and players lined up to drop quarters into this strange new machine. Atari ultimately built 13,022 units of Battlezone, which indicates strong demand. For comparison, many successful games of the era had production runs in the few thousands. Anything over 10,000 was a bona fide smash. It wasn't quite the phenomenon of Pac-Man or Defender, but Battlezone was among the top games of 1980-81. It even earned recognition in the industry awards. At the 1981 Arcade Awards, held by Electronic Games magazine, Battlezone was highlighted as one of the year's best arcade games, alongside Pac-Man and Defender. Arcade aficionados were impressed by its originality. Battlezone was the first game to put players in a truly 3D world with a first-person view, predating the term first-person shooter. Reviewers of the day marveled at the wireframe graphics and the immersive controls. Nothing like it had been seen before. Players, especially those who fancied military themes or sci-fi, took to it instantly. There's a famous anecdote, recounted by Atari staff, of a little kid standing on a chair to play Battlezone and outperforming adults, a testament to how compelling the game was across age groups. The game had broad appeal. It was easy to understand, shoot the enemy before it shoots you, but hard to master, and the immersive viewpoint drew people in out of curiosity. Many arcade goers of the early 80s still remember that green vector glow and the feeling of peering into the periscope, completely absorbed. As one Atari designer, Rich Adam, later said, "Battlezone was a great one. I did love that game. For a quarter, you could be in a tank simulator. A pretty darn good one. That was pretty good value. That's what made Battlezone a phenomenon." Indeed, it offered an experience that felt well beyond the 25-cent price of admission, a true bang for your quarter. The game performed well on location, becoming a staple of arcades, pizza shops, and bowling alleys throughout the early 80s. To keep players coming back, some operators even installed high-score save kits later on, as the original hardware didn't save scores after power-off. This fostered friendly competition among local players. High-score contests were a big part of Battlezone's culture. Once Twin Galaxies and other scorekeeping bodies emerged around 1982, Battlezone featured on the leaderboard. Over the years, scores climbed as dedicated players found techniques to marathon the game. The first official world record for Battlezone was set by David Palmer in August 1985, and it was a jaw-dropper. Palmer scored 23 million points in a single continuous session, which lasted about 23 hours of play. He basically played for almost a full day on one credit, which shows the level of endurance and maybe a bit of exploitation of safe strategies that top players achieved. David Palmer's record from 1985 stood as the high bar for decades and is still often cited in the Twin Galaxies archives. In that same year, he also put up a 10 million point game during the Video Game Masters tournament, proving his consistency. There have been other skilled players since, but Palmer's marathon remains legendary. Few have the stamina to challenge it. It's worth noting that playing Battlezone for that long is not only mentally taxing, but physically tiring. Imagine standing at a machine looking through a scope for hours, with your arms managing 2 joysticks non-stop. Beyond the arcades, Battlezone's influence is deeply ingrained in gaming history. It's frequently cited as a precursor to the first-person shooter genre and virtual reality games. While it wasn't about roaming through corridors like later FPS games, the core idea of a first-person perspective in a real-time action environment was trailblazing. In fact, in 1983, a young programmer named John Carmack, who would later create Doom, listed Battlezone as one of his favorite games. The seed of first-person 3D was planted. The game's vector graphic style also influenced later titles. You can see echoes of Battlezone in other 80s games like Star Wars, the 1983 Atari arcade game with vector graphics for space battles, and Atari's own Red Baron, a 1980 flying game using similar tech. Culturally, Battlezone was iconic enough to appear in the movie Tron, 1982. If you look in Flynn's arcade in the film, a Battlezone cabinet is visible among the machines, a nod to its status in the arcade pantheon. It's also been referenced in literature and pop culture as that arcade tank game. For instance, Ernest Cline's novel Ready Player One mentions various 80s games, though Battlezone is more subtly referenced compared to Pac-Man or Tempest. The legacy continued in later decades. Atari released an official Battlezone remake for PCs in the 1990s, though it was a very different hybrid of tank shooter and strategy game, sharing only the name. More faithfully, in the 2010s, an updated VR-enabled Battlezone game was released, bringing the original concept full circle with modern virtual reality headsets, a fitting tribute to the arcade classic that first made players feel like they stepped into another world. Even so, purists will always love the 1980 original. There's something timeless about the green wireframe graphics and simple, tight gameplay. It exemplifies the golden age design, easy to learn, difficult to master, technically innovative, and yet elegantly straightforward. Arcade collectors today hold Battlezone in high regard, though thankfully it's not too hard to find. By industry metrics, Battlezone is considered very common in collections. Hundreds of machines are still owned by members of the arcade museum collector community. The vector monitors are often the tricky part to maintain, as with any classic vector game, but restoration experts keep them running. Some collectors specifically seek out the original periscope version to get the full experience. Owning a Battlezone means you effectively have a bit of video game history in your game room, the first true 3D action game. It's not just nostalgia. The game is genuinely still fun to play once you get the hang of the controls and slip into that wireframe world. And speaking of fun, Battlezone generated its share of myths and legends back in the day. The open nature of the game's world invited speculation and wild stories. One popular urban legend was that if you drove your tank far enough into the distance, you could reach that big volcano drawn on the horizon. Some kids swore that inside the volcano there was a hidden castle you could explore. Of course, this isn't true at all. The volcano and mountains are just background drawings, and you can never actually reach them. The game world isn't that large and will loop around. The designers were amused by these rumors. Lyle Raines, one of Atari's creative directors, recalled a letter from a fan describing the supposed secret castle inside the volcano and asking how to get to it. Of course, none of this was true. Rains laughed. It was a great little story to get from a fan. Who knows, we may yet do a volcano with a castle in it. The truth is, the developers anticipated players trying to just drive off into the scenery to avoid combat, and they specifically coded the game to thwart such pacifism. If you wander too long without engaging an enemy, the game will spawn a homing missile to chase you down and force a fight. In other words, no sightseeing in this war zone. Keep battling or die. That missile in the back was the designer's solution to players attempting to hide in the virtual countryside. So, while there's no Easter egg castle to find, the myth itself speaks to how imaginative players were and how strongly the game captured their imagination. People were literally dreaming up whole extra narratives beyond the programmed game. Over 40 years later, Battlezone remains a landmark. It's often enshrined in lists of the greatest video games for its innovation. The Smithsonian Institution and other museums have included Battlezone in exhibitions about the history of video games, recognizing its status as the first successful 3D vehicle shooter. Game designers who grew up in the 80s frequently cite it as an inspiration. The concept of a first-person tank game has been reinterpreted many times, from modern tank sims to futuristic shooters, but players and developers still look back at Battlezone with respect and nostalgia. It demonstrated in 1980 that video games could offer an experience, a feeling that went beyond simple sprites, the feeling of being inside an alternate world. As one Atari veteran put it, for a quarter, you could escape into a tank and go to war. That was pretty good value. That's what made Battlezone a phenomenon. And let's not forget the simple joy of it. Battlezone is just plain fun. The controls are satisfying, the action is intense but measured, and every time you dodge a bullet or nail a long-range shot, you get a jolt of triumph. There's a timeless appeal in that wireframe world. In an era of photorealistic games, Battlezone's graphics are abstract, but they activate your imagination. Those green lines become real tanks and mountains in your mind's eye. It's a testament to the game's design that it can still pull you in today. To wrap up, Battlezone is a true classic that stands tall in arcade history. It combined technological ingenuity, brilliant game design, and even a bit of real-world drama with the Army story to create a lasting legacy. If you ever find one of these machines, don't be shy, step up, peer into the periscope, and take a journey back to 1980s Battlefield. Just watch out for that super tank on your 6. And that's it for this episode of Coin Detected. If you have any questions or comments, would like to hear me talk about a game I haven't covered yet, or would like to correct something I said, you can send a message to rob@coindetected.com. This is Retro Rob. This episode is over, but the game never ends. See you at the arcade.
The sequence is complete. Game over.